Welcome to our Strategic Partner Series. This series comes out once a month, and within these conversations with coaches and consultants, EOS implementers, predictive index partners, and the like, what you will hear is how these folks walk beside and really support CEOs to implement really strong people strategies inside their organizations. Join me in welcoming our guest for this week. This week, we welcome Jessica Bensch to the People Strategy Podcast. Jessica is building a global movement to prioritize psychological safety. And in our conversation today, we're going to hear specifically her experiences in the work environment and some of her work as an agile coach, specifically with Roche. Also, the movement that she is specifically starting with a Speak Up Summit and Vanguard Voices. So join me in welcoming Jessica to the show. Jessica, I am so thrilled to continue our conversation and to have you speak up on a topic that I know is so incredibly important to you. And I'm so curious, what has folks speak up in the workplace?
What makes them speak up is when they feel like they are seen, they are heard, they are valued. That means that they feel that when they are within their team are truly listening to what they are saying. People are not on their phones, people are not looking away, really active listening is happening. And they feel that their work is being recognized. If they're saying something, it's being acknowledged in some way. There's so much that can contribute to one feeling like they are part of the team, that they are really contributing to a greater mission, bigger than themselves.
Amazing. And that greater mission bigger than themselves. So often, when I'm talking with folks, it is, what are your personal goals? What are those things that are really important to you? And when I know that, now we can tie it into an organizational goal, because if it's not the and both, that creates such a huge disconnect of, well, why do I want to do it anyway? Right?
Yeah. And I think especially in this time, there are more of us who want to think beyond ourselves. We know that beyond our front door is a big world that has topics that we can contribute to for a greater good. And I personally believe as human beings that we want to be connected to something greater. And, oftentimes that's why we choose the organizations we choose for the mission that the organization stands for.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And, so when we talk about that, there's always kind of the flip side of this question, right? So what makes folks want to speak up at work? And the flip side of that is, what makes folks not want to speak up at work? And I know for you, this is a topic that is so near and dear to your heart, that you're so passionate about. So why are you so passionate about folks speaking up at work?
I think it fundamentally comes down to believing that we all have a purpose to serve in this world. So I start there. And in order to serve that purpose, we do need to use our voices and to use the best of our skills and our talents, in this case, in the workplace. And so this is a topic that is so near and dear to my heart, because I've been in the workplace for over 20 years now, and I see so many people stifling a part of who they are and what they stand for as soon as they're at work. And the reason this happens is oftentimes, I would say, has to come down to stories in the hallways, stories of how people see their workplace culture, how aligned that culture is in terms of the values that they stand for. It's the stories that carry from the history into, the present. And then, of course, the experiences, the real experiences that one may personally have.
And so with that experience, so much of what I'm hearing you say is, one, are the core values of the individual aligned with the core values of the organization, or those personal values? But even more so than that, it's really about, are we living based in the behaviors? Are those behaviors that our leaders are showing, our staff are showing, are those truly aligned with what our core values are in a way that has us feel whole and complete at work?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of companies have big words on the wall, and it sounds so wonderful. It sounds so perfect in many ways. And we want to live up to those values. We want to live up to those, the big purpose of the organization. But, we're human beings. We're going to fall short sometimes of what we say. So there's sometimes a disconnect between what we say as an organization or as human beings versus what we actually do. And then there's a fear of being called out or, given certain feedback. And there's something about, putting on a mask when coming into the workplace and showing up in a different way than what you really stand for. And that disconnect within yourself is not comfortable for anyone. So there is something about what we say in the office place versus how we operate. And right now we've accepted a system in which, yeah, that happens. That's just status quo. And I think we're in a time now where we can change this and we can change this together.
Absolutely. And so, what I really just heard you say, if I read between the lines, is there's a leadership responsibility to hold the cultural values accountable with the behaviors both for themselves and the team.
It definitely starts at the top, for sure. Tone at the top is always the most effective. I'm hesitant to always point fingers, at one group or another. I look at us all as human beings, but definitely it starts at the top in order to give that message that this is a company, a workplace where we value, constructive dissent, where we value your voice, your ideas in order for us to achieve our mission. And yes, it's not going to be easy, but we need to do this together. So yes, that tone needs to start there, but it also needs to carry down at all levels of the organization. And this is not a philosophical point. It's actually with practices and techniques that can be put in place at the organizational level, at the team level, and even for individuals themselves.
Yeah. And I'm curious, so often I'll hear from my listeners, can you give us an example that's happened within your workplace for you or with a team of how you've implemented this? And I'm curious, could you provide that?
Yeah. So the way I see this approach, it comes down to three parts. One is at the organizational level, the team level, and individual level. And we do need to look at this holistically. I'll start at the individual level. Any organization that encourages coaching for individuals offers a fantastic service because I'm a firm believer that everyone can benefit from coaching. So coaching in terms of if you have any particular workplace challenge, it's good to have somebody to question and bring out of you perhaps some answers that you would not necessarily discover on your own. So coaching at an individual level is the first place. Second is at the team level. And this is where we often talk about psychological safety. At the team level, there are practices that agile coaches or facilitators can put in place, like team canvases. Team canvas usually includes the team purpose. What do we stand for? What are our team norms in terms of our agreements on how we show up, when we show up? What's the purpose of those meetings? How will we handle conflict? How will we make decisions? And what are the outcomes that we work towards? This is just one example that can be put in place. Team Canvas is a powerful way to set up a team, especially from the beginning, in such a way that people will feel that they are truly part of the team and can lend their voice based on their skills and expertise. But then we look at the organizational level. The organizational level means this affects every level in the organization. And here we look at this from not just prioritizing psychological safety through training and regular awareness, and quite frankly, putting it into the policy of the organization that it is a priority, but we also look at it from a transparency perspective and accountability perspective. So with transparency, one example is employee engagement surveys. Oftentimes, employee engagement surveys are administered in an organization, and we see the top line numbers. But the comments are the ones that provides so much rich content and background, but it's not often shared or widely shared. It may be shared with a few in a back room. The reason I give this as an example is if you make this widely shared, what happens is you give people the permission to lean into the hard conversations that are coming up or the hard topics that are coming up through those comments. And it encourages bringing those conversations and topics to the table instead of through whispers in the hallways. That's just one example in providing transparency. You can also do it through exit interviews. What are the comments that come out through that? How many people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I love this cascading, right? Like organizational, team, personal, and so often what we do is we're aligning our goals together that shift through, especially with employee engagement surveys. What happens to it, right? Like if you ask us for feedback, what are you going to do with that? And, what I'm so curious about is, our listeners love to hear what are the stories that tie theory into practicality. So I'm really curious, Jessica, can you give us an example of how this has been implemented in an organization with a client or within your own organization that really shows kind of that value of these theories in how did that make that person feel? How did that create that interaction and those results?
So when you open up those comments, you can have the venting meaning the ventilation that's needed in meetings to discuss, hey, this is what has been noted on the engagement survey. What can we do? What can we do to address this? Putting the smelly fish on the table is the way to do it. And that's certainly the way we've handled it within our immediate team. And we are a team of about 20 people. And it was very easy to be able to come up with solutions from there. And it creates this sense of we are in it together. This is not about pointing fingers at any one person. This is about how do we better ourselves as a team.
I've never heard that before, that venting equals ventilation. I love that kind of piece of it of, how do we create that trust that we can have that ventilation to kind of move things out of the organization that could otherwise fester. And so with that, I'm curious. So we've talked about, the impact of creating a space in the work environment for individuals to, be heard. You've mentioned psychological safety a couple of times. And one of the things, that I know from our listeners is, hey, what is the definition of that? And what does that personally mean to you?
So the definition to me is when one feels free to express their thoughts without a fear of negative consequence. So what it means for me personally is I can go into the workplace and express my professional thought and know that it's not going to hurt me through my performance review, through a potential promotion or bonus or anything, or even my reputation. That I am seen as somebody who truly wants to, further the work, the project work, or whatever the topic may be for the good of the team and the company. And it's not easy. I'm not trying to claim that this is an easy thing, but it's the fact that you can express, but know there is not a consequence. And I'm talking from obviously a professional perspective. You're not saying words that are against any sort of code of conduct or anything like this. This is from a truly coming from a respectful and professional perspective.
Right. And I think that that's really important to almost define, which is, look, psychological safety does not mean that you have, carte blanche to come in and say anything at any point in time. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that there are at times items that are important to be addressed. And when we bring those forward in the right way, in the right pathway, that those are heard and many times challenged with curiosity of help me understand what is specifically behind that. How do we specifically look at that? And what is the result of that so that we can move this forward? And so, when I look at this at the very simplest terms, we do a lot with manufacturing. And it's like, if I walk out on the manufacturing floor and I see that there's an issue, if I go up to, a machine operator and say, hey, what's going on with this? They're willing to name it and also name, hey, this is, I've not been allowed to do preventative maintenance on my machine, which should happen once a week. And that is creating this, this, and this. Great. There's then no pushback or repercussion from maintenance or from, production or whatever based on saying that.
Right.
And I just want to give these really clear day-to-day examples because there are times where things are said when it is completely inappropriate. And then there are where it's like, hey, here's some examples. And why aren't individuals sharing their insights? Well, they're either afraid that's now going to become on my plate and I don't know how to resolve it, or I'm not going to be seen as value because I'm not at a certain level in the organization.
I'll take it even one step further.
Oh, perfect.
You express your thoughts and you speak up with all the best intent. And yet there is some retaliation of some sort. Yeah. Then you have mechanisms in the company in order to report on that retaliation. You report on that retaliation and actually you become the target, even through that reporting. So the victim becomes the target all over again because of the way the system has been set up. So going through, the appropriate channels in the company doesn't necessarily always help an individual who speaks up, even when the company policy is saying speak up.
Right. And this goes back to culture, right? So what I think is really important here is we truly look at what is the culture that we're creating and how do we create the culture that supports individuals speaking up and knowing, guess what, this stuff doesn't turn around overnight.
No.
And I think one of the things that's really important is that we also don't create a culture of tattletaling. And I love what you said before, Jessica, of intent. What is the intent of bringing these things forward? Because as simple as that production operator naming, hey, I haven't had a chance to do my preventative maintenance, that gets out. And now all of a sudden, is maintenance not going to support you going forward because you kind of named what is so for them? Do you lose the trust of the staff around you because they're going, you said something and it made it harder here? So it's one of those where it's so nuanced in between what those items are that when we look at how we layered, I love the layer cake, right? Like organizational, team, and individual, but within the team, there's also the leadership team. And
Yes.
How do we ensure that that leadership team is aligned? Because if I look at preventative maintenance, that has an impact on production, that has an impact on sales, that has an impact on quality. How do we ensure that just because one lever goes up, it doesn't down another lever, that we're all aligned on what those key things are? And that clarity and communication, I think so often is what creates the retaliation, that we need to step back a couple steps and say, hey, what is the end goal we're trying to get at? And how do we create a cohesive environment in order to do that?
And it goes back to what you said earlier. It starts at the top. And
Right.
when the top prioritizes this, it needs to prioritize the psychological safety and measures it and monitors this on a regular basis through engagement surveys or whatever it may be, through transparency as well as accountability through feedback. This is how you bring it down, top down, bottom up, side to side in an organization.
Right.
Easier
Absolutely.
said than done, but it needs to be looked at from a holistic perspective.
Correct. Otherwise, it can go wonky on either side.
Exactly.
That we're creating an environment for everybody to go tell on everyone else, so
Yes.
to say, and we're setting a platter for nobody to be successful. Or we're setting a platter on the other side that says, don't speak up because we're not going to value you as a person. And I think it's such a tightrope in between that once you figure it out, it elevates everybody. But it's how do we unwind, especially with very established organizations, how do we unwind some of the behaviors that have been learned over several years? You've got an individual that's been with an organization for 45 years. Okay, we're going to unwind some of these behaviors to get to a different result.
So I'm a big believer that you need to put in practices with
Mhm.
discipline, and behaviors will start to change through that practice. Yeah. So
Right.
regular feedback, upwards feedback, having that transparency through the engagement survey, transparency in other ways as well. This will all practice that muscle of having those courageous conversations. And it's actually, you don't even need to do everything, just pulling a few of those levers under awareness of psychological safety, transparency, and accountability will already move and shift the culture in a wonderful and positive way.
Yeah. And I love the three things you just said, right? It's awareness, transparency, and accountability. Because when you first said, hey, we're going to jump straight to discipline, that stops us from speaking, right? And so I love how you just named it, because I just want to unwind that a minute to say, one of the things you started with was coaching. So often we're not aware of the environments that we're creating. And that's where coaching becomes so imperative, is when we can build the coaching in with the clear outcomes that we're looking for, and really creating the playbook for how do we share information in a way that we also create that safety. And guess what? It's not complaint after complaint after complaint. You have to have ownership in the results of the outcome. You can't just dump it on my desk and leave.
Yeah. So in my day job, I'm an agile coach. And as part of, I use the word discipline because there's a lot of discipline that comes with agile.
Uh-huh.
And at the end of any cycle, you have a retrospective. So to look back on that cycle, like 90 days, for example, look back over the 90 days as a team. What did we do well? What were our challenges? And what are the opportunities that we can take into consideration into the next 90 days? It's a very open discussion, maybe not easy, but it's very factual, and you're in it as a team and you're learning as you go. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that learning as you go, because we're going to screw it up
Yes.
700 times. Yet we just want to make sure we don't screw it up the same way every time.
Yes.
For sure. So, what is one thing that you want to leave our audience with based on this conversation?
So the one thing I would like to say is we are in this together. It's not going to take one person to shift a culture. It really is going to take all of us at all levels, irrespective of where we sit. And that means helping each other to back to prioritizing psychological safety, uplifting this up in our teams and our organizations, and together nurture this and look out for each other. So this is a collective topic. This is not about just one.
Right. Yeah. And I love that, because there's accountability at every single level of the organization, which kind of goes back to that finger pointing. You're like, we're not just going to point the finger at the leadership team. This is also how we're bringing information forward. What is our ownership with it? What is the intention? Am I bringing this forward because I want to get someone else in trouble? Or am I bringing this forward because it truly has an impact on my ability to engage with the work and stay engaged to have the impact of why I'm here?
Absolutely.
Amazing. And we will have all the ways for our listeners to find you, Jessica, in the show notes. However, I know that you are so excited about something that's coming up in June. And do you want to just very quickly speak a little bit about that?
So, me and my team are organizing a global virtual summit in June. It's called the Speak Up Summit. It's going to run over 24 hours consecutively. We have more than 50 thought leaders around the world who are coming to the virtual stage. Thought leaders, academics, advocates, employees around the world. The purpose of the event is not just to create global awareness on psychological safety, but it's also to catalyze action, because we truly believe that it takes a collective global movement for us to make true impactful change into our organizations. And so that summit is going to be the platform for us to catalyze actions together.
And another amazing conversation with Jessica on the People Strategy podcast. Here are my 3 key insights with our conversation with Jessica on psychological safety. The first is stories in the hallway impact if we speak up. So if we disconnect between what we saw and what we do, we're going to have a huge miss inside of our organization that has a negative impact on our business results, because then there's whispers in the halls instead of transparent conversations around what's actually happening, so that we have an opportunity as a leadership team to resolve that. And so that insight, stories of the hall, impact, if we speak up, the people strategy is really tied to the core values and the culture of our organization. We know that our culture is the behaviors that we allow and don't allow over and over in the organization. So if we punish our staff for speaking up, guess what? We're creating an environment where no one's going to say anything. So we do not have the ability to innovate. So as a people strategy, really looking at what are your core values and how are those core values actually lived down the hall, so that folks are speaking up and speaking into what is needed based on the core values in order to hit the business results. The result is trust. We have much stronger trust because we've built the relationship with each other, and we trust our teammates, we trust our leaders to have our back, and we trust those folks around us so that we can name what is so when we know that is going to allow us to align on and move that mission forward, or that goal forward, which is more than likely that business outcome. Insight number 2, ventilation in meetings by putting the smelly fish on the table. I love that, right? So how do we create the ventilation in the meeting? So when we're venting to each other, we're creating that ventilation. So thank you for that insight, Jessica. And so the people strategy is diagnose what is happening in your organization. Implement climate surveys. Those climate surveys allow your staff to name what is so specifically for them. And then bring those climate surveys back to your team and have open and honest discussion about it. Allow your staff to vent and ventilate what's happening so that the smelly fish doesn't sit there and rot. Here is what we see as the biggest issue with employee engagement surveys, is that they don't go anywhere outside of HR or the leadership team. This actually creates more issues than it does if you were never to do the engagement survey to begin with. So again, ensure that when you're asking the question, you provide the time and the space to ventilate those results. And when you ventilate the results of feedback, what happens is we increase the trust in our team. When we increase the trust, we increase the engagement in our team. When we increase the engagement of our team, our staff want to be there to solve those problems, resulting in hitting those business results. The third insight that I had from our conversation with Jessica was specifically related to 3 words. She said transparency, awareness, and accountability. How do we create that transparency, awareness, and accountability through every level of our organization? And when we do this through the lens of psychological safety, meaning we're creating an environment where we can bring our concerns forward in a way that is the intention of transparency, awareness, and accountability. And as a people strategy, how do we do that? We do that through both our formalized and our informalized processes. So we do that through coaching one-on-one at the individual level. We do that through our team meetings. We do that through our team goals and ensuring that we're having debrief meetings at the end of a process and at the end of a project to say what went well and what didn't go well here. Did we know at the beginning what the goals were? Were we crystal clear on that? If we think back to 2 of the last podcasts that we've had with Chris Allaire and with Tarek, both of those podcasts talked about communication and the importance of clarity in our goals. It's no different here. We need to have clarity in what the goal is so we know what winning looks like. We're transparent in why things are and aren't working. We're bringing awareness to what those things are so we're not making the same mistake over and over again, and we're holding each other accountable at every level of the organization. The result? Increased trust, increased amount of engagement with our team, and we're going to be sharing much more with each other. So with that, here's a challenge for you. Are there areas in your organization or people in your organization that you do not feel comfortable speaking up to and with? Really look at that and say, why? Why don't I feel comfortable with this? And how can you name that in a way that does not cut that person down, but really starts to resolve a problem. The more we can speak up to each other and to our team, not negatively, not cutting somebody down, but really saying, hey, I'm speaking up because this is the goal that we both agree upon, and this is where we want to go. How do we do that in a way to overcome some of the obstacles? And if you want more, guess what? There's a summit coming up in June, and that information will be in the show notes for you to learn more about how to create psychological safety in your environment. And note that this is a global movement, and we are excited to be able to share a little bit of what Jessica had to share with us. Thanks so much, and have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much for listening today. I'd love to connect with you. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn at Traci, Traci Austin, and at our website at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. If you'd love to learn more about our process, please reach out to us. And again, thank you so much for listening and sharing your feedback with us through a review. Have a fantastic day.